What could make someone who has reached almost every pinnacle of fame still become overwhelmed with emotion when looking back on the past at the age of 85? It was not the glorious days with the Beatles. It was not the records that sold hundreds of millions of copies. Nor was it the stadiums packed with fans who had cheered his name for decades. Instead, Ringo Starr remembers one night he wishes had never happened. A night when alcohol, anger, and despair pushed him to the edge of a point of no return. When he woke up the following morning, the first thing Ringo saw left him completely stunned. That very moment changed the rest of his life forever and forced him to face a painful truth. If he continued living that way, he would lose everything. But in that darkest moment, one person did not walk away. Many decades later, at the age of 85, with nothing left to prove to the world, Ringo has finally spoken more openly about that woman. Not because she was a famous star, nor because they had a perfect marriage. Rather because, in his own words, without her, the world might not still have Ringo Starr today. So who was that woman? What happened on that fateful night that changed the life of a music legend forever? And why, after more than 40 years, does Ringo still call it the greatest gift life has ever given him? To many people, Ringo Starr always seemed to be the happiest member of the Beatles. While John Lennon was rebellious, Paul McCartney was meticulous, and George Harrison was quiet and introspective, Ringo was remembered for his humor, calm nature, and ability to hold the band together. That image led many to believe he also had the most peaceful personal life. But behind that familiar smile lay a difficult childhood and a deep sense of insecurity that stayed with him for many years. Ringo Starr, born Richard Starkey, was born on the 7th of July 1940 in Liverpool, England. His parents divorced when he was just 3 years old, and from then on he was raised mainly by his mother under modest financial circumstances. His childhood was also marked by long stays in hospital due to serious illnesses. At one point, Ringo suffered from severe peritonitis and later spent nearly 2 years recovering from tuberculosis. Those years interrupted his education, but it was in hospital that he first encountered the drums and began to develop a love for music. When the Beatles exploded onto the scene in the early 1960s, Ringo's life changed within a remarkably short time. From a young man raised in one of Liverpool's working-class neighborhoods, he became one of the most famous people on the planet. Yet fame arrived so quickly that it also brought enormous pressure. Ringo has admitted many times that he often felt he was the least remarkable member of the band, constantly questioning his own worth despite being adored by millions. That sense of insecurity did not disappear when the Beatles reached the height of their success. On the contrary, it quietly grew stronger with the passing years. Once the stage lights went out, Ringo was still left to face his worries, his loneliness, and his fear of being left behind. That was also why he longed for a real home, a place where Richard Starkey was loved, rather than Ringo Starr, the star known by the entire world. Long before the packed stadiums and before the Beatles became the most famous band on earth, Ringo Starr was simply a young man in Liverpool trying to pursue his dream of making music. It was during those ordinary days that he met Maureen Cox, the young woman who would become his first wife, and witnessed the extraordinary changes that would transform his life. At the time, Maureen was a young hairdresser and one of the many girls who regularly attended the Beatles' performances at clubs around Liverpool. Unlike many other fans who were captivated by the growing spotlight surrounding the band, Maureen knew Ringo when he was still simply Richard Starkey, a cheerful, sincere young man who still carried many worries about the future. Their relationship developed quite quickly, but when the Beatles began creating an unprecedented phenomenon in music history, their romance was immediately swept into the whirlwind of fame. Thousands of fans surrounded every venue where the band appeared. The press followed the members' every move. Even their most private moments gradually became topics of public discussion. In 1965, when Maureen became pregnant with their first son, the couple decided to hold a quiet wedding in London. They tried to keep the ceremony away from the media spotlight, but the news spread rapidly nonetheless. For many female fans, Ringo's marriage came as a devastating shock. Thousands of letters of protest poured in, and some even declared that they would never forgive Maureen for stealing their idol. Even so, the early years of their marriage were filled with happiness. They welcomed 3 children and tried to build a normal family life in the middle of Beatlemania. Whenever he had time off from long tours, Ringo always wanted to return home, because it was the only place where he could briefly forget that he was an international superstar. Yet fame sometimes comes with a price that no marriage can easily withstand. As the Beatles entered their most turbulent period, the pressure, the endless touring, and the rock and roll lifestyle began creating cracks in Ringo's family life. Then, an event involving one of his closest friends changed everything forever. The early 1970s were a period of enormous upheaval for every member of the Beatles. The legendary band officially disbanded, each member pursued a separate path, and all of them had to adapt to a life in which the 4 of them were no longer standing side by side. For Ringo Starr, it was also the time when he began confronting pressures that music had previously masked. Without the band's relentless schedule, Ringo had more time to recognize the growing cracks in his marriage. His career constantly took him from place to place, while endless parties, alcohol, and extramarital relationships gradually became part of his life. Years later, Ringo openly admitted that he had not been a perfect husband and had made decisions he would regret for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Maureen also faced immense pressure, living in the shadow of one of the most famous men in the world. Every change in their marriage quickly became front-page news, causing the distance between them to grow even wider. At a time when everything was already fragile, a story involving George Harrison, Ringo's close friend, made the relationships within the Beatles especially sensitive. Years later, George openly admitted that he had developed feelings for Maureen. Ringo was aware of it as well, and although the story has been told with varying details over the years, it remains one of the most controversial episodes in the history of the Beatles. What is remarkable is that, rather than allowing the incident to become an irreparable feud, Ringo and George ultimately preserved their friendship. According to those close to them, the two had honest conversations and chose to move forward, even though the emotional wounds could not possibly disappear overnight. By 1975, after more than 10 years of marriage, Ringo Starr and Maureen Cox officially divorced. There were no lengthy legal battles or public attacks through the media. Both understood that their marriage had effectively come to an end long before. Even so, Ringo always spoke of Maureen with respect, because she had stood by him before fame arrived and was the mother of the 3 children he loved dearly. By the end of the 1970s, Ringo Starr remained a globally recognized name, yet his private life was the complete opposite of that public image. After the collapse of his marriage, he threw himself into work, endless parties, and alcohol in an attempt to fill the emptiness inside him. Outwardly, Ringo still smiled and appeared before the public with his familiar optimism, but those closest to him could see that he was gradually losing his sense of balance. Then, in 1980, while filming the comedy Caveman, Ringo met Barbara Bach, the American actress who had become internationally famous as a Bond girl in The Spy Who Loved Me. Barbara possessed striking beauty, intelligence, and a strong personality that was very different from the stereotype many people associated with Hollywood actresses. What drew Ringo to Barbara was not simply her beauty, but the sense of peace he felt in her presence. A unique connection quickly formed between them. They had both experienced failed marriages, both understood the price of fame, and both carried emotional scars that the public could never see. Their relationship progressed faster than anyone had imagined. Ringo soon became certain that Barbara was the woman he wanted to spend his life with, and before long he ended his relationship with his girlfriend at the time so that he could devote himself entirely to Barbara. In April 1981, they were married in London, surrounded by family and friends who wished them well. Notably, the surviving members of the Beatles showed their support for the couple. Although John Lennon had made plans before his death, he was tragically murdered in December 1980 and therefore could not attend the wedding. Paul McCartney and George Harrison, along with many close friends, were present. Ringo and Barbara's wedding was regarded as one of the entertainment industry's most talked about events that year. Yet their new marriage did not immediately bring the happiness they had hoped for. Both Ringo and Barbara were struggling with their own personal challenges. Instead of helping each other break free from destructive habits, they unintentionally sank even deeper into alcohol and substance abuse. Endless parties, long periods of isolation in their mansion, and increasingly severe alcohol misuse gradually robbed them both of control over their lives. By 1988, Ringo Starr had completely lost control because of alcohol. He later admitted that there were days when he drank so heavily that he could no longer remember what had happened only a few hours earlier. Their lives gradually became consumed by parties, isolation, and addiction. Then one night, the tragedy Ringo never wanted to speak about took place. While intoxicated, he became physically violent towards Barbara Bach. When he woke the following morning and saw that his wife had been injured, Ringo was utterly devastated. He later said that this was the moment he realized alcohol was not only destroying his own life, but had also come dangerously close to taking away the person he loved most. Instead of leaving Ringo, Barbara made an extraordinarily courageous decision. She agreed to stay, but only if they both committed to changing. Shortly afterwards, they traveled hand in hand to a rehabilitation center in Tucson, Arizona, to begin again. It became the greatest turning point in Ringo Starr's life. He not only gave up alcohol, but also learned to confront his mistakes instead of continuing to run from them. Since 1988, both Ringo and Barbara have remained sober, regarding the day they entered rehabilitation as a milestone, every bit as significant as their wedding day. In many interviews over recent years, Ringo has repeatedly expressed his gratitude to Barbara. He has said that she saved his life because, without their decision to enter rehabilitation together in 1988, it is difficult to imagine that he would still be here today. After everything he has experienced, Ringo no longer sees success or fame as the true measure of happiness. At the age of 85, the man who once traveled the world with the Beatles now finds joy in life's simplest pleasures: a peaceful morning, a meal shared with his wife, short trips, and time spent with his family. The things that once seemed ordinary have now become the gifts he treasures most. Looking back on his life, Ringo understands that music gave him the world. But it was Barbara Bach who helped him keep his life together. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy he wishes to speak about when reflecting on the years he has left. Ringo Starr's story reminds us that success is not always the most valuable thing in life. Sometimes, what truly saves a person is simply someone who chooses to stay when the rest of the world has turned away. If this story has touched you, leave a comment and share your thoughts. In your opinion, what helped Ringo Starr overcome the darkest years of his life? And if you enjoy true stories about the lives of Hollywood and music legends, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming videos. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again in the next story.